After Patricia received the papers, but before we went to court, we both pretended to play parts for each other. I claimed to want to discuss things further, but the private investigator sent me the photo of her kissing Bradley Jacobson, and the coffin lid on our marriage slammed shut. By the 5th minute of the first video clip, our marriage had been buried, and I began shoveling dirt over its grave. I am not sure what Patricia was pretending. Perhaps she thought her continual infidelity was still an issue worth discussing, or perhaps she imagined we could reach an acceptable compromise to remain married while she continued to sleep with Bradley on the side. My wife, Patricia Wilson May Anderson, is an attorney. Bradley is one of her clients, and she makes a profession by finding ways to be reasonable in utterly absurd situations. I believe she does it voluntarily. At home, the words "Matt, be reasonable" were a running theme during our 25-year marriage. However, once I served her the papers, she added a new phrase to her repertoire, fragile male ego, as in "Mate, this is not about me or who I am, or I am not sleeping with you, it's about your weak male ego." God, I despise that phrase. And of course, we didn't get too far into that last conversation before she decided to drop it. "Matt, if you could look past your fragile male ego, you'd realize this isn't a threat to you at all." She offered me her most comforting and logical grin. I do not love him. In a few months, we both move on. We can still ride out into the sunset together. I have to give Patricia credit, she's really brave. As she spoke, she carelessly ran her fingers along the stem of her favorite glass of unoaked Australian Chardonnay. My divorce papers and numerous incriminating images were in a manila folder on our kitchen table. The private investigator was able to take, in other words, the Titanic has hit the iceberg. My God, the orchestra is getting close, and the women and children are being guided to the lifeboat. Meanwhile, Patricia says that if I can be rational and overcome my fragile male ego, we might still make it to port. Patricia believes we're still bargaining, but I'm no longer interested in settling anything. "I want the conversation to finish, Patricia," I remarked, interrupting her mid-sentence. "You keep mentioning my weak male ego, stating that if I can overcome it, we'll be okay." "What exactly do you mean by fragile male ego?" she griped for a while, slightly offended by being stopped. "Well, the math is really straightforward. You are terrified of competition. You're afraid you won't measure up." She smiled at me again, gently with a hint of disdain. "But dear, don't worry. You are my boy, my man." "What about Bradley?" she repeated. "Bradley is only a toy, like a workout machine. I do not intend to replace you or stop loving you. You have nothing to worry about," she reassured me. I gave her a slightly furrowed, somewhat perplexed expression, the kind males employ to make their ladies feel superior, generally so they can get away with something. "So, to be clear, you believe I am concerned that you may stop liking me or replace me with a younger model?" She nodded, her soft smile broadening. "Do you think that makes me a little vulnerable? Do I need reassurance?" "Exactly," I spoke slowly, like I was trying to piece everything together, and somehow this vulnerability is related to the fact that I am a male. She patted my arm lightly and condescendingly. "Oh dear," she said. "It isn't only you. Every man has a fragile ego." Her smile widened. "Part of what we do as women is to assist our men keep your confidence up." I wanted to yell at her and ask how in God's name sleeping with a 25-year-old was meant to help me, but I knew it would just make her dig her heels in. I wasn't shocked. Patricia believed the pop psychology drill about women being stronger than males. We've been dancing around that stuff for years, but I was tired. We were nearing the conclusion, and I was done dancing. "Patricia, I know you've been using that phrase for a while," I replied, gazing her down. "I've been letting things slide. Do one thing I've learned after 25 years with you is to choose my battles. But if there's one thing I'd like to leave you with today, it's an appreciation of how stupid this entire issue is." She began to object, but I continued, "People focus on the weak male ego because it appears abnormal. It's just like those videos. How often have you seen a guy get hit where it hurts the most? She nodded, and I knew she was about to let me go with that for a time before bringing me back in force. Yes, it's funny, at least to women, because guys are always portrayed as strong, and this is enough to have the majority of them fall down and puke. Do you understand what I mean? She nodded. However, observing a woman in the same scenario isn't hilarious, is it? She nodded again, but why not? If one person's agony is amusing, why not the other? Because that is violence. A man striking a woman is violence. And a woman striking a man is not. I shook my head. Never mind, we're getting off subject. The argument is that witnessing a woman in agony isn't hilarious because we're socialized to regard women as frail and weak. So the thought of making a woman cry is not unusual, alternatively, it could be very hilarious. I do not understand where you are going with this, she said. I took a deep breath. The idea is that it is the same for the ego. When I go to work every day, my buddies mock me about my sexual abilities, my size, my tummy, my thinning hair, and whatever else they can think of. Imagine if your pals did the same to you. Imagine arriving into the office and immediately receiving feedback on every area in which you feel inadequate. How does that make you feel? God, she exclaimed, I can't see a lady ever treating her friend that way, and definitely not all the time. But this is exactly what happens to us big strong men. We dismiss it, make a comment, and go about our business. Now, I was the one patting her on the back softly and condescendingly. I wondered if she had noticed. The truth is that I only allow myself to feel frail and vulnerable in this home. This is where I remove my armor, reveal my delicate underbelly, and trust that you will not take advantage of it. What you see as my fragile male ego is simply me letting my guard down. And this is the one location in the world where I feel comfortable being delicate. Do you understand? Patricia grinned and nodded. I could see her building up her power for another attack, but that's precisely the point. Matt, here you are safe. You can be vulnerable. I'm not going to abandon or throw away what we have because of a fling. I removed my spectacles and touched the bridge of my nose. You still don't get it, Patricia. I believed you when you said I was the world's best lover, even though I knew objectively it wasn't true. Hell, in the last 25 years, I've only had one lover, not a lot of experience. I smiled. I trusted you when you said I was sufficient for you. That my size was ideal for you. That my body still excites you. I took you at your word, even when I knew you were only boosting my ego. I decided to be vulnerable with you because I believed I could trust you. I yelled, smashing my hand against the table. Her eyes widened, and she remained mute. I took a deep breath and attempted to restore my calm voice. About 6 months ago, I saw that you weren't being as careful with my vulnerability. I noticed how you said, as I removed my shirt, how you closed your eyes while we had sex. I picked up on the sarcastic comments about going to the gym or giving up drinking. She glanced at me, surprised, and I proceeded. I realized you had ceased telling me about your day and asking about mine. I noticed you weren't spending much time with me before you started sleeping with Bradley. I understood you were no longer a safe environment for me, Matt. You were not going to shield my vulnerability. She paused, and the attorney was at a loss for words. I stared her in the eyes with firmness. Her eyes were bright, and I'm sure mine were too. I attempted to fight it, Patricia. I asked you out for dinner more frequently, they complimented your clothing. I attempted to schedule more getaways and more time just for us. I wanted to show you how special you were to me. I dressed better, I started going to the gym. I hoped you would recall how special I once was to you. I gazed down at my hands. Not now, I couldn't show her the tears. I couldn't remain exposed any longer. Enough, it did not work. You discovered reasons to cancel dinners, reasons why we couldn't take a trip. When I admired your clothes, I could see you were worried that I would discover you were dressed for him. When I sent flowers to your workplace, I never received a response. I looked up to her later when you started picking fights to avoid having sex with me. I realized I had failed you, forgot how special I was, and you were already on your way to no longer being special to me. I never chose conflicts to avoid sex. I groaned. Seriously, that is her takeaway, Patricia. Can you please be honest, at least for yourself, if not with me? You have been pushing me away for 6 months. She looked up at me briefly before returning her attention to her hands. Charming hands, I shrugged. Anyway, yes, back then my ego was vulnerable. I spent a lot of time in the office with the door shut, mourning our connection. I attempted to put on a strong look at work, so you wouldn't realize how much you harmed me. I started looking for reasons to leave the house to avoid spending time with someone who could and did wish to hurt me. She appeared shocked. I smiled and softly caressed her hand again. But you'll be pleased to know that my fragile ego has recovered. I discovered other ways to spend my time and people who made me feel unique. She gazed up at the question with her eyes. I smirked. No, I have not cheated on you. But I did observe that some of the women at the gym didn't seem too put off by my body these days. Anyway, by the time I got documentation and was speaking with a lawyer, you would have had no idea that my fragile male ego had ever been injured. Are we finished? I assumed we were. After all, I had said what I needed to, and I hoped she had finally heard me. Perhaps we can finally move on. But of course, I married a lawyer, so there was no such thing as a lost case. But Matt, there was never any need for this, she yelled. Yes, I admit I have been sidetracked lately, but I've never stopped loving you. You were always at the top of my list. I apologize. I didn't realize how fragile you were or how much I damaged you. Patricia kept talking, creating wonderful images with her words, but I was not listening. That word again, fragile. She still didn't understand it, and I realized she probably never would. I wasn't trying to be pleasant anymore, Patricia. Please stop, I snapped. I believe she could hear the rage in my voice, though I attempted to hide it. I took a long, slow breath and exhaled. You still don't understand, do you? You still believe this is all about my vulnerability, my delicate male ego, right? There's no shame in it, honey. All men, and all individuals, Patricia, we all have fragile egos, and we trust those we care about to keep them safe. Yes, of course, but guys are particularly vulnerable. I'm going to tell you a small secret. I leaned in as if I were going to tell her something, and I tried my hardest not to be sarcastic, but she wasn't making it easy. Patricia had spent most of the previous 25 years trying to figure out how to be honest with me without upsetting my ego. You asked me if that lipstick looked good on you or if that clothing made you appear obese. I had to come up with an answer that wouldn't hurt your feelings while also preventing you from leaving the house looking like a deranged clown or an overstuffed sausage. Patricia blushed and her eyes widened. She wasn't used to this level of honesty. I suddenly realized it was humorous, Patricia. When I say things like, honey, I'm not sure that lipstick goes with that blouse, or, wow, could you please change? I'm not comfortable having our neighbors drooling on your chest all night. I was offering you an out. I pretended I was unsure of my remarks or that my fragile male ego was in jeopardy. And do you understand why I did that? She shook her head. It's because I didn't want to jeopardize your ego, Patricia fumed. I recall multiple occasions when you were very clear that things did not seem well. I smirked and admitted that I made mistakes from time to time. I believe we both recall what happened when I commented on your eyeshadow resembling that of an adulteress or when I replied, sure, that dress does make your buttocks appear large. Those large, crimson eyes, the cold, thank you for being honest, plus a week or two of frigid temperatures in the bedroom. When it comes to telling my wife what I think, I quickly understood that honesty is overrated. So, you've lied to me for 25 years. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. It was time to wrap things up. Let's imagine I told you a chosen and well-edited version of the truth. I told you you were the most stunning woman in the world, that your gym visits were 10 years apart your age, that even Venus de Milo couldn't match your backside. I lavished you with compliments, similar to those you bestowed upon me, to demonstrate how I perceive you. In the process, I strengthened your fragile ego. My ego is not delicate, Patricia. You've got a fat ass. She stared at me like I'd punched her in the chest. What I smiled at her, you have stretch marks, your breasts have sagged, your hair roots are turning gray, and your teeth are yellowing. The pricey creams you buy do not conceal the wrinkles on your face or the double chin. Darling, it's time to think about aging gracefully because fighting it is no longer working. She gasped, her eyes expanded, after a few hits they all struck the mark. Lord Jesus, Matthew, Patricia, remember the feeling you're having right now. Think about it. Assume I told you I was sleeping with a pretty young lady at the office, someone 10 or 20 years younger than you, with a tight buttocks and large breasts. She is using all of her tricks on me because our relationship is still fresh, and she is just getting started with her game. Assume I return home to you after spending time with her a few times per week. How is your ego doing? I felt a little fragile. Patricia appeared a little pale. I agree, she mumbled. That is what you never understood, Patricia. I am not blind. You aren't the most gorgeous woman in the world. Hell, I could walk out the front door and locate a half-dozen women in our area who are objectively more appealing than you. I looked at her again, but her head remained lowered. I could see tears on her cheeks. You're not the most gorgeous, the brightest, or the funniest, but for me, you were all of those things. You were the most gorgeous, funniest, and best when I saw all of your shortcomings. I also saw our life together. Your breasts sagged when you fed our children, you have a large behind because you have carried them in your body. You have laughter lines because we laughed together. I looked at your body's roadmap and noticed how many miles we had walked together. I treasured every one of those miles and the impressions they left. She looked up, and it was like the end of a boxing movie, the one that occurred shortly before the knockout. She sobbed, "What are you seeing now, Lord?" I thought she was virtually asking for it. A portion of myself, hell, most of me, wanted to land that knockout blow, the one that would break her so badly that she'd spend the next few years jumping from bed to bed, attempting to prove she still had it. And there she was, chin raised, just waiting for it to drop. But that's the point. It's no longer about delivering the knockout blow. In fact, it isn't even about Patricia. She glanced in the mirror, observed the passage of time, and concluded she could find the spring of youth in the body of a young guy. When she was apprehended, she attempted to maintain her dignity, throwing forth challenges and witty phrases. I believe we both understand now that she is frail, little, and will be left alone. As for me, I had already cried in the car, behind my office door, in a park a mile away from my house. I spent months hiding my anguish from my wife while fighting, and then I mourned the end of my marriage. Now, I needed to plan the remainder of my life. The first step was to ask myself what I wanted to see in the mirror each morning, a guy who took a cheap shot, a guy who won some senseless competition with a weak lady who ruined her own life, a bully? No, I wanted to see what I was seeing right now, a kind, good, and honest man. I took another long breath and placed my hand over Patricia's again. What am I seeing now? I wondered. Now, I saw a woman with whom I shared some of my best years. I saw someone I once trusted with my vulnerabilities, but now I couldn't. I gripped her hand. I saw someone I'd really miss. She stood up and forced a grin. It was crooked, and it didn't help disguise my tears. It doesn't have to be this way, she explained. We can find our way back. No, we cannot, I exhaled. Patricia, you are correct about one thing, I am not frail. But I trusted that I would never be able to remove my armor again. I will never be able to let you in. Perhaps we could live together, sleep on the same bed, go on vacation, create some memories. But the truth is, I will always be monitoring you. I am wondering if you are critiquing my body, whether you're comparing me in bed to someone else. I am wondering if you are staying because you love me or simply out of habit. That is not true, I said. I am not going to live like that, Patricia. I believe I have another 30 to 40 years ahead of me, and I don't want to spend them with someone I don't trust, pretending to be safe and secure when I am not. I do not deserve that, and honestly, if you truly loved me, you wouldn't have me go through that. Patricia is fairly open despite her legal expertise. I could see in her eyes that she was testing out counterarguments to see which ones would work. And then I witnessed the moment she realized it was truly over. When Patricia decided not to fight, the brightness in her eyes faded. The divorce proceeded rapidly. We exchanged jewels for tools, and a television and furniture for my partially rebuilt Mustang. In the end, we sold the house, divided everything equally, and saved a lot of money on lawyers. The thing about divorce is that even after it is finalized, it is not truly over. I still see Patricia for our children's birthdays, anniversaries, and Christmases. She occasionally brings a date, and for the past year or so, I've generally been accompanied by a woman. It was the same woman, and Patricia's eyes tell me she understands what it implies. I try not to brag, but occasionally my ego may be a little delicate. Here is the next story. My wife, Kelly, assumed I had no idea about her little project. She probably thought I was too ignorant or naive to see her burgeoning affair with her coworker, Tom. She assumed I simply turned a blind eye and let her carry on with him. However, she was in for a harsh revelation. She had no idea that my suspicions had been smoldering for quite some time. The signs were all present: late evenings at work, a sudden obsession with improving her clothing, her mood swings, and obvious distancing when it came to stuff we used to have fun together. Every time I tried to bring it up, she dismissed it as if nothing was wrong. Kelly consistently denied that anything was happening, blaming it all on my so-called anxieties and jealousy. With my job keeping me busy, I finally hired a private investigator. I was not about to sit there and be left in the dark. From the beginning of our romance and throughout the 10 years we have been married, I made it clear that cheating was not something I would accept. So, with a knot in my gut, I found myself at Jake Sullivan's office, listening to his report. At first, I was relieved when he informed me Kelly hadn't passed that boundary. However, that relief evaporated as he noted that it was only a matter of time. It turned out my wife was having an affair, though it hadn't progressed to something physical. Jake told me that Kelly and Tom had apparently begun referring to each other as work spouses. I despised the phrase. She had only one spouse, and it was me. While some may regard it as innocuous or amusing, it appeared to me that she was already involved in an emotional affair. It turns out I wasn't wrong. Jake's report revealed that Kelly and Tom had lunch together every day, just the two of them. They would sit close, touch hands, and perhaps share a kiss. I saw images of it all, and I swear I wanted to choke that arrogant Tom. In addition to their meals, they were working late together for no apparent reason. It seemed as if they were escaping their real lives and squeezing every last minute out of the day. Jack also tracked down Kelly's emails and texts. I was aware that it was illegal and that I would be unable to utilize it in court if the situation arose. Divorce for infidelity is complicated in our state. No-fault divorces are significantly simpler and require no evidence. I still needed this for my own peace of mind. Sullivan refused to hand over the actual messages or allow me to see them. He simply gave me a summary of what they stated. He assured me that Kelly had never spoken negatively about me, even when Tom tried. Kelly wouldn't let him say anything against me. In some strange way, that was a small mercy. Their emails and texts confirmed that their relationship had become personal, though neither had said "I love you." The conversations were intimate, almost like sexting. Tom had even sent her pictures of his body, which Kelly gratefully returned with some topless photos of her own. Fortunately, she hadn't sent anything explicit yet. As I sat there trying to process everything, Sullivan delivered the worst news yet. Tom's wife was leaving town for a few days to visit her mother, and Kelly and Tom intended to take advantage of the opportunity to escalate their relationship. They were unsure how they could spend the night together if I was still in town, as I had no plans to leave. They needed to get creative. One idea was to tell me Kelly was going on a girls' weekend, but Kelly didn't want to risk informing me by checking in with her friend. So they scrapped the plan. Another idea they had was to persuade me to leave town. Looking back, I remember Kelly gently suggesting that I go golfing with my buddies. I rejected the offer without thinking twice. Finally, they decided on a bold yet basic strategy: honesty. Tom figured I was well on my way to becoming the type of man who would ignore my wife's affair in order to keep her happy and close to him. He truly persuaded Kelly that sleeping with him would enhance our sex life and deepen our love. He told her she only had to lay it out for me, and I grudgingly consented to let it happen. Tom clearly underestimated my willpower. What surprised me the most was Kelly's willingness to believe his deceptive story. She should have known. It should be noted that I would never stand for this if she did not see it. I began to wonder if she was not thinking clearly. Sullivan informed me that that was all the information he had at the moment, so I collected the report and went home. I instructed him to keep a watch on Kelly's texts and notify me if anything new occurred. By Friday, Sullivan had called back with an update. Kelly planned to see me after work on Monday. She meant to be open about her plans for Friday night: a romantic date with Tom, dinner, dancing, and spending the night together in a hotel. The intention was for her to return home on Saturday or possibly Sunday, depending on how things went. Kelly and Tom had even practiced her little speech, assuming that I would simply go along with it. They expected me to be unhappy at first, but Kelly was going to ease me down by stating it would be a one-time occurrence. They both knew it wasn't true. She even offered that we could be personal afterward, as if I'd be delighted to welcome her back after her time with Tom. That is very nice of them to consider my needs, with only a few days to prepare for this intervention, as they playfully referred to it. I was determined to turn the tables over the weekend. I spent a lot of time reflecting, wondering if my marriage to Kelly was even worth salvaging as I processed my feelings. A plan began to emerge in my head. I realized I needed to face this head-on and put an end to it once and for all. When we initially married, Kelly and I were inseparable. We shared everything: our time, dreams, and lives. She was my best friend and unquestionably my best lover. But somewhere along the line, all of it evaporated. Perhaps that's just how things are. Maybe nothing is supposed to last forever. I guess I'd always had this traditional, idealistic view of marriage: two people coming together to face whatever life throws at them as a team. Having been through failed marriages before Kelly, I couldn't help but wonder if the problem was with us or if the concept of marriage itself was broken. How can someone expect to maintain the same sentiments, desires, and interests when everything around them is always changing in this fast-paced world of social media and quick satisfaction? It's possible that marriage, like dinosaurs and DVDs, is becoming obsolete. I momentarily considered letting Kelly be with Tom, but I quickly dismissed that idea. There was no way I was going to allow him to claim any rights to my wife. I was preparing for a fight on Monday, soon after lunch. Kelly called. "Hey, Kelly," I said, realizing that she hadn't called me much during work hours recently. It was something I had begun to worry about, so I made a point of asking if everything was fine. She welcomed me with a "Hello, honey," and I couldn't help but wonder if she used the same tone with Tom. Putting that thought away, I asked casually if she'd be home on time tonight because she mentioned she had something important to discuss. She verified she'd be home around 5:15, and I stated that I had something important to tell her. Her quiet on the other end of the telephone told me she was interested when she asked what my great news was. I told her I'd rather save it until we met face to face. I then excused myself, saying I needed to finish a monthly report, and ended the call. After that, I informed my boss that I needed the rest of the day off, and he didn't mind at all. My nerves were on edge as I sat at the kitchen table later that evening, but I remained calm. At 5:27, the garage door creaked open, and despite my inner turmoil, I maintained a calm exterior when Kelly walked in. Dropping her keys and purse on the table, there was a chilled bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and 2 glasses ready for her. I felt a sense of comfort. Fortunately, Tom was not with her, which would have made matters even more problematic. I greeted her with a smile. "Hey, love," I answered cheerfully, mirroring the kind tone she had used earlier. I asked if she wanted some time to settle in before we talked or if she wanted to get right into it. My willingness to get in caught her off guard. I could see she wasn't expecting me to be so willing to talk. That was part of my plan to keep her guessing and maintain control of the situation. Kelly acknowledged she hadn't expected to be waiting like this. But after a moment of doubt, she decided it was better to get it over with. She sat at the same table as me. I proposed that I convey my news first and ask if she had any concerns about it. She appeared dubious but gave a cautious nod, not declaring it was fine until she received a more detailed response. I poured us each glasses of wine. She took hers and finished half of it before I refilled it. I began by informing her that I had been doing a lot of thinking. I vowed not to drag things out. I hesitated, allowing the quiet to hang thick between us, watching her lean in, her gaze fixed on me. Kelly was curious as to what was going on. "I want a divorce," I said plainly. I let the words sink in, giving her time to comprehend. She appeared perplexed at first, as if she didn't understand what I was saying, but then it hit her, and shock washed over her face. I noticed a glimmer of worry, possibly even terror, before it turned to surprise, probably because she was concerned when she asked why. I already knew about her and Tom. I told her outright that my feelings had changed. "I don't love you anymore." That one appeared to hit her hard. She looked at me, stunned, trying to understand what I was saying. "You, what?" she stammered. "I've fallen out of love with you, Kelly," I murmured, pretending I couldn't remember when. In fact, I knew when things began to alter, but I had been avoiding it. Confused, she asked, "What exactly are you talking about?" She appeared to be on the edge of breaking down, which astonished me more than expected. I attempted to build a picture of how things used to be between us, recalling memories from the early days of our marriage. I reminded her of how much time we used to spend together, discussing everything. She nodded as I spoke, her eyes revealing that she was also swept up in the recollections. I mentioned how we'd have lunch together, how we'd look forward to returning home to each other, and even the pottery lessons she persuaded me to do with her. I could tell how much those moments meant to her as I spoke. "It was never about the ceramics," I explained. "It was about spending time with you." She assured me she enjoyed every minute of those experiences, watching me, assisting me, and enjoying my passion for it. It made me think of how we'd spend hours painting the Christmas village houses we bought one year. We purchased a dozen unpainted ones and worked on them together to create a small holiday scene. It was tedious, but we enjoyed it. Kelly even conceded that my dwellings always looked better than hers, smiling as she recalled those late evenings at the table painting the small tiles. I genuinely loved her back then. Then there were those massive posters we put up together. We picked them up on our trip to Myrtle Beach, long before adult coloring books were popular. We spent hours on them with all of those colored pens. But like our love, their pens have dried up. Kelly attempted to explain herself, stating her love had not faded, but I disregarded her and continued on. Our friends would tell us how jealous they were of our relationship. We accomplished everything together. We took lengthy walks every day, always holding hands. If I needed to run some errands, such as picking up grass trimmer line at the hardware store, you tagged along with me. And if you wanted to shop for clothes, I would patiently wait outside the dressing room while you tried them on. Kelly questioned me at that moment, reminding me that I didn't much enjoy going shopping with her. I emphasized that even though I was addicted to my phone on previous trips, I was still present with her. "I didn't care what you purchased," I told her. "I told you that you looked wonderful in everything." I informed her that I could have easily stayed at home watching sports, but I decided to be with her instead. We also discussed how other ladies in the area would get together for activities like bingo or bachelorette parties, but Kelly showed no interest. "I'd rather hang out with you than the hens," she remarked, referring to them by their former nickname. We recalled all the evenings we'd spent snuggled up under the blankets, watching our favorite movie. Kelly dusted away a tear, expressing how much she enjoyed the film. "We must have seen that 100 times," I added, "and I was always pleased to continue watching it with you." When I mentioned the possibility of divorce, Kelly promptly stated that she did not want the marriage to end. She had imagined us growing old together, taking cooking classes, learning to ballroom dance, or simply lying in bed and reading side by side. I explained to her that I didn't know when things began to shift between us, but I could feel the growing distance. Looking her straight in the eyes, I reminded her that we used to dine out 2 or 3 times a week, but that it had since dropped to once a week primarily to her. She had told me she didn't have time for lunch outside the workplace, but I knew that wasn't the case. She was still enjoying lunch, but with someone else. We eventually stopped coming to lunch together, and I ended up joining my coworkers. I genuinely began to enjoy their company, perhaps more than I should have. I said, twisting the truth slightly. I tried not to make Kelly feel like she was solely to blame. I didn't want her to become defensive or for this talk to escalate into a fight. That was not what I was looking for, not yet. The days of coming home early merely to spend more time together had lost their importance. We both began staying late at work, and when we eventually arrived home, we felt miles away, either distracted or too weary to care. Kelly wondered why I hadn't brought it up, and I conceded that she had a point. In actuality, I had tried to discuss it several times previously. I agreed with her, wishing I could understand why spending time together had become less essential to her. I acknowledged that I frequently felt that I was the one responsible for the distance between us, but deep down, I knew that wasn't real. I also knew that if I confronted her about Tom immediately, everything would blow up. She'd perceive me as nothing more than a jealous, overly controlling spouse. I needed her to recall what we had originally and to consider how she contributed to its gradual demise. We simply stopped doing stuff together. I proceeded, "You began attending bachelorette parties, and I began spending my evenings at poker games. You'd go to the spa on weekends while I'd go to the golf course." Kelly and I got to the point where we could go entire days without discussing anything other than the weather or what was on the news. Even our love life had deteriorated, whether due to exhaustion or a lack of enthusiasm. There was always something preventing us from becoming intimate. I reminded her of how things were when we were first married, when we couldn't get enough of each other. "Remember how we used to get together 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes even more than once a day?" I replied with a grin. I remembered how I would taunt her while she was cooking, and we'd end up skipping dinner entirely, spending the night tangled up with each other. Things like soaking in the hot tub, which were once part of our daily routine, hadn't happened in over a year. Here, when Kelly intimated that I was no longer interested in getting intimate, I swiftly dismissed it as ludicrous. It felt like she was trying to shift the responsibility onto me in order to excuse her own behavior. I laughed and clarified, "Oh, that is not it. I've never stopped desiring intimacy. I'm still as enthusiastic as I was 5 years ago. The truth is that I stopped seeking intimacy with you." I knew it would cut deep. She thought she'd rejected me, but here I was, turning the script, telling her that our lack of intimacy was due to my lack of desire for her. Kelly was visibly surprised and asked what I meant when I said she didn't want to be intimate with me. Casually, I remarked that from where I was standing, she appeared uninterested in anything slightly entertaining or spontaneous. It seemed like you just wanted to get it over with and go on to more exciting things, such as knitting. I made a joke, but the sting was intentional. I went on to mention how much I missed those lazy weekend marathons of intimacy, but she didn't seem to care anymore, not even about experiencing genuine pleasure. I began classifying our interactions as dull, and to be honest, I was just faking enjoyment the last few times to get through it. When I confessed, Kelly disputed, stating I couldn't have been faking since I'd finished. I reminded her how she insisted on using protection while being on birth control. I told her out that she never checked, so it was simple for me to fake it, a little roll off and throw the empty condom away. Her face was full with astonishment and humiliation. I admitted my strategy had worked and apologized, but my tone was not particularly genuine. To make matters worse, I added that it wasn't her, but me. She looked at me, her eyes dry. Now I couldn't tell if she was angry, humiliated, or simply annoyed. While attempting to calm the situation, I refilled her wine glass, and she settled down with another large sip. I went on to inform her that it was just a matter of time until one of us began seeking attention elsewhere. When I mentioned someone else, I was not referring to myself, but you didn't realize that, I said, catching her off guard. Kelly's rage increased, and she wanted to know whether I was cheating or had fallen for someone else. I reassured her that I was dedicated to our marriage and would not tolerate cheating. I reminded her of how both of us had been cheated on by our ex-partners and how I pledged never to make that mistake again. Promptly, I apologized for the accusation, understanding how unfair it was. She stated she knew deep down I couldn't do it, though shame was written all over her face. Her hands trembled slightly. Diverting the conversation, I dropped a bombshell. I told her that we should wait until after the divorce before starting anything fresh, hinting at a potential new love in my life. Then, I finally announced the big news. I had previously met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers. You'll be served with divorce papers this Friday, I told her. When she urgently questioned whether I was serious, I quietly confirmed it. I couldn't help but smile as I stated that it was the best option for both of us, allowing us to move forward. I concluded that the previous 10 years had been a waste of time. She maintained that those years had not been a waste for her. I told Kelly that deep down, she probably wanted the divorce just as much as I did. I said, "It's obvious you haven't wanted to be with me for a long time." I even called our marriage a mistake. Kelly instantly opposed, stating she didn't want a divorce and that she still loved me, that she wanted us to stay married forever. With a sad heart, I told her the truth, I didn't love her anymore. I explained that because we were in a no-fault divorce state, we could divide everything equally without going through a nasty legal struggle, unless one of us could prove the other had cheated, which was unlikely in our case. I recommended that we divide our finances equally and go to the bank the following day. I said that we'd need to open new accounts, get new credit cards, transfer utilities, and list the house for sale. I informed her that a realtor was supposed to arrive by Wednesday to list the property. Kelly, feeling absolutely overwhelmed, attempted to object. Her voice was shaky as she implored me to stop. Tears welled up again as I calmly informed her that I had already packed my belongings and would be sleeping in a hotel until I found something more permanent. I recommended that you stay in the house until it sells, I added. She yelled at me to wait, but I persisted, insisting that there was no reason to delay and that we needed to get everything in order by Friday. Still perplexed, she asked to know what made Friday so special. I casually noted that Friday was the night she had booked a date with her boyfriend, Tom. I informed her that was the night they were going to spend together at a hotel, having what she undoubtedly expected to be a romantic evening. Kelly froze, her eyes wide, her mouth hanging open as she strained to speak. I brought out a folder containing the private investigator's summary report and placed it in front of her as she attempted to respond. I flipped to the section detailing her arrangements with Tom for Friday night. I stopped her and smirked, saying, "Let me guess, it isn't as it seems." I reminded her of the photos of her and Tom kissing at lunch. She stared at me, tears flowing down her cheeks, and murmured a soft apology. I smiled and added, "Funny, because I now remember exactly when I stopped loving you." I told her that was the day I realized she was preparing me to play the clueless, betrayed husband, much like my ex-wife. She blurted out another apology, desperately attempting to persuade me that she didn't love Tom. According to her, it was all a fling to spice up our relationship. She went on to say that following her night with Tom, we'd spend the remainder of the weekend rekindling our romance. Tom had apparently convinced her that this brief encounter would somehow turn me on and revive our romance. I answered with surprise, telling her I couldn't see how sleeping with someone else was expected to restore our connection. I questioned how she felt that made sense. She altered tactics, attempting to defend herself by stating that Tom had convinced her that I'd be fine with it if it made her happy. I restated that I want you to be happy with me, as we used to be, not with someone else. I couldn't understand how she thought I'd ever agree to this, especially when I'd been so clear about my views on infidelity. She attempted to justify it, claiming that it wouldn't be technically adultery because she would have my approval. I firmly shut her off. That will never happen. Looking back, I couldn't understand how I had allowed things to get this far. I admitted that perhaps I should have noticed the symptoms, should have noticed how monotony and loneliness had separated us. I explained that Tom's attentiveness had rekindled something in her that I had been unable to do. She questioned how I could be bored and lonely when we were meant to be in love. I had to acknowledge that I don't know. She did not stop there, however. She mentioned that it could be because I separated myself first. We stopped having lunch with her, and they stopped spending so much time together. She accused me of preferring to isolate myself by devoting more time to work and friends, leaving both of us lonely and vulnerable. She refused to accept that she had been the one to pull away. She reminded me of occasions when I said I was too busy for lunch and even texted her to go without me. In her perspective, I was the one who had changed, and the fact that I never mentioned it implied that I didn't recognize how much had changed between us. You were so caught up in your own world with Tom that you had no idea you were losing me, Kelly cried aloud, her voice shaking. She said that she did not want Tom but rather me and asked us to return to our previous relationship. She apologized, admitting she had made a mistake and, frustrated, had given up on us. But I shook my head and told her it was too late for that. Kelly pleaded, offering to quit her job, find work somewhere, and never meet Tom again. She swore once more that she loved me and insisted that she had not cheated because they had not slept together. She described herself as an idiot, saying Tom meant nothing to her, and she begged me not to leave. But I stayed firm and told her it wasn't that simple. When she tried to argue that I had stopped her before she got too far, I cut her off. Just because you didn't have sex doesn't mean you didn't deceive me, I said. Kelly protested, stating that they were only friends. I fired back, you should have been closer to me than anyone else. Distraught, Kelly lowered her head into her arms, sobbing violently, and vowed never to take me for granted again. She pleaded with me, asking if we could accept this as a major error and seeking forgiveness. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook so easily. It wasn't simply an error, I replied strongly. It was a betrayal of everything we owned. She tried to convince me that her heart had always belonged to me, and that surrendering her body to another guy was something she was prepared to do to save our relationship. I reminded her that she didn't go through with it, but I wondered if my love for her was so insignificant that she didn't consider it worth fighting for. Kelly sobbed that I meant everything to her and that she would do anything for me, including die. My love for you is gone, I told her coldly. Her eyes widened, and she screamed, grabbing my arms, asking me not to leave despite her apologies and urgent pleas. I held my stand. I think you are sorry, I said, but it does not change the fact that I no longer love you. When she divulged that Tom was married and solely interested in a physical fling, I told her she may find solace in him. I smirked and responded, I'm sure his wife will have something to say about that. I then told Kelly that Tom's wife and I had chosen the same divorce attorney. I handed her a folder containing the investigator's reports, photos of her and Tom, and information about the divorce settlement. Take your time and read everything, I advised. Kelly implored me not to do it, but I didn't respond. I got up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the home without looking back, as I heard her sobbing furiously behind me. Updates: Kelly was struggling with the divorce proceedings, and rather than prolonging it with a costly legal battle, I consented. When the court suggested we seek marriage counseling, to my surprise, the counseling was more effective than I had imagined. It provided us with an opportunity to converse openly and without judgment. Kelly now understood how Tom's approaches had nearly ruined our marriage, and I was able to communicate the extent of the anguish and embarrassment she had inflicted. The counselor was delighted with our improvement. After a few sessions, I returned home, and Kelly and I began reconnecting in ways we hadn't in years. We even reignited our passion, and Kelly was more accepting of my needs than she had ever been. A year later, we were back to the love we shared at the start of our marriage. Kelly had abandoned her previous position and joined me at my company. We commuted together and ate lunch together every day, not because we had to, but because we truly wanted to. We accomplished practically everything together. We decorated a tiny Christmas tree, completed some old paintings from years ago, took another pottery class, and even signed up for ballroom dance lessons. To my astonishment, I discovered an old box of colored pens that were not dried out at all. One night, we watched You've Got Mail while cuddling under a blanket. Kelly kissed me gently and said she needed to tell me something important. I saw tears fill up in her eyes, and my heart skipped a beat in panic. Before I could react, Kelly said, "You're going to be a daddy." I smiled, wiped away her tears, and repeated a Tom Hanks line, "Don't cry, shop girl." I am a sucker for happy endings. Okay, that concludes that entertaining narrative. Now, let us go on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, because the next one will take you for a journey. My name is Bob, and I am a 48-year-old trucker. I once had a beautiful marriage. I thought I did, but then, in an instant, everything crumbled. I lost not only my family, but also my job in the home I had fought so hard to purchase over a decade ago. Let me explain how my wife's infidelity flipped my life upside down. As a trucker, the road became my second home. Hours spent behind the wheel merged into a single stretch of asphalt. The scenery passed by like a distant memory, with fresh faces and places constantly appearing and disappearing. There were nights spent sleeping in the cab of my truck, wrapped up under a blanket to keep warm. Sometimes, traffic congestion caused by accidents or construction held me up, but driving into a motel for a hot shower and a proper bed provided some respite from the grind. Trucking as a job has its ups and downs, but it allows me to support my wife, Melissa, and daughter, Nancy. I did everything I could to be home as much as possible, but those long-distance excursions meant missing out on significant events. Regardless, they always welcomed me back with open arms. Nancy would come running, shrieking with delight, and fling herself into my arms, telling me about her days. Melissa would be there with a friendly grin and a nice lunch. Despite the distance my job required, our partnership felt steady enough, if not precisely joyous. I married Melissa after discovering she was suddenly pregnant. It didn't seem like I had much of a choice. She was in nursing school at the time and didn't want to drop out, so I started trucking to help pay for her schooling. My job kept me away from home, but I still felt strongly about her. When Nancy was born, everything changed. My feelings for that tiny kid were something else. She brought light into my life on those long, lonely roads. Coming home was more than simply a nice experience. It was about seeing Nancy. She always greeted me first, and embracing her in my arms after weeks apart made everything worthwhile. We spent as much time together as we could in the zoo, on carnival rides, and playing games. I'd tell her about my adventures, and she'd tell me all about hers. Even when I was on the road, she would call me every night before bedtime. Knowing I was working hard for her made it easier to get through the difficult times. Now, Nancy is 18 years old and entering college, but she will always be my little child. Even when I arrive home late at night, she greets me with a smile and hugs, just like when she was younger. Melissa, on the other hand, is often unavailable due to her night hours at the hospital. So on nights when she doesn't expect me back, I sneak in, remove my jacket and shoes, and head directly to the kitchen for something to eat. Nancy always heats dinner for me, and we talk while the kettle boils. I told her everything about my recent vacation to Oregon, including the Rocky Cliffs, Crater Lake, Smith Rock State Park, waterfalls, and Mount Hood. I expressed my desire to take the entire family on vacation to appreciate nature's beauty together. Nancy said little about the notion, which struck me as unusual, so I asked, "How have you and your mother been without me?" With a grin, I expected her to express how much they missed me. Instead, tears filled her eyes. "What is wrong?" I inquired quickly, alarmed. "I have never been good with tears, especially when it comes to my kid." And then, without warning, she began sobbing, holding me tightly like she would as a child, and burying her face in my chest. "It has been difficult here without you," Nancy whispered, and her words caught me off guard. It turns out that while I was out on the long, empty highways, my wife had invited a stranger into our home. The man's name is Ian, and despite his claims to be a coworker and only a friend, Nancy is disturbed by him. He acts improperly by wandering about shirtless, putting his feet up on the couch like he owns the house, laughing loudly, and cracking vulgar jokes. He helps himself to anything he wants, rummaging through my books, fiddling with tools in the garage, and delving through the kitchen cabinets as if it were his own home. Nancy told me she had begged him to respect the property, but he merely laughed it off, treating her concerns as if they were a joke. His presence makes her feel insecure in what should be her home, transforming it into the domain of an unwanted guest who behaves like the king of the castle. Whenever he shows up, Nancy has been hiding herself in her room to avoid him, but his loud voice and chats with her mother continue to reach her ears. It bothers her terror. Her mother's apparent contempt for the home we had formerly maintained, so clean, comfortable, and tranquil. Things grew worse when Nancy disclosed that he had been barging into her room unexpectedly, rifling through her belongings, and asking her intimate questions. Did he even make obscene remarks about her beauty? Nancy attempted to talk to her mother about it, pleading with her to stop allowing him to visit, but her comments appear to have gone unheard. Her mother has been obsessed with Ian's complete disregard for Nancy since he first appeared. As Nancy tells me all of this, my imagination runs, picturing my homecoming and how I'll restore order in my house. There's no way I'm letting a guy behave like that under my roof, I think. The idea of Melissa cheating on me with this stranger sends a flood of rage through me. I'm inclined to get out my wrath by breaking or hitting something, however, the dread in Nancy's eyes keeps me back. Instead, I decide to try a different strategy. I'll catch my wife in the act and confront him face to face. I send Melissa a message, pretending to be delayed on the road, and book a motel room just a block away. The plan is straightforward. If the guy returns, Nancy will phone, and I will run in. I did not have to wait long. Just 2 days later, Nancy called, and I dashed back home. My hands trembled with anxiety and adrenaline as I crept softly through the rear door and into the bedroom, where I could hear voices and laughter. The moment felt like it lasted forever, but I shoved the door open, causing it to crash against the wall. My wife and her partner were locked in a kiss that ended abruptly as I burst in. There was no mistaking it anymore. Melissa's affair occurred right in front of me. She appeared surprised, as if she couldn't believe I was standing there. The gentleman, clothed in only his pants, had the audacity to look at me, demanding, "Who in the heck are you?" as if I were the one invading my own home. I retaliated with my fist, landing squarely on his face. Everything that followed was a haze of wrath. I threw punch after punch, hitting him in the face, ribs, and gut until he collapsed on the floor, knocked out cold and breathing heavily. I turned to face Melissa, who was stuck in a state of shock and horror. "What did you do?" she whispered. Her speech was filled with bitterness. Tears welled in my eyes, a sensation of betrayal and loneliness washed over me. The immediate shock passed, and Melissa grabbed the phone, requesting an ambulance. The minutes of waiting seemed to last forever until the sirens eventually went off. The silence was then broken as paramedics raced in and carried the unconscious man out on a stretcher. Melissa and I accompanied them to the hospital and sat awkwardly in the waiting room. The tension between us was tangible. I sat there in silence, revisiting the night over and over in my thoughts. What finally prompted me to approach my wife was a long conversation we had that night. She revealed that she had felt unloved for a long period and that my frequent absences for business, along with my concentration on our child, had left her feeling ignored. She even admitted to being envious of the bond one had with Nancy. She desired attention, and while living together, our schedules kept us apart. She was lonely, and Ian had provided her with a momentary respite by offering companionship in the empty places of her life. According to the physicians, Ian's injuries were minor, consisting of just a concussion. After that night, Melissa and I decided to part ways. Our marriage, which had been more of a need than genuine love, had been crumbling for some time. We started the divorce process and divided everything equally. I found it difficult to swallow. After all the years I had invested in our marriage, it never developed into the joyful existence I had dreamed of. Letting go of something that had caused so much anguish was difficult, but I knew I needed to move on for Nancy's sake. Melissa, at the very least, relocated to a new city, giving herself a fresh start. She eventually fell in love and married again. It was difficult to forgive her, but we did it for our daughter's sake. Nancy would occasionally visit her mother, but she never felt like she fit in with her mother's new family. Her true home was with me, where she knew she was deeply loved. Nancy and I grew closer than ever as life presented us with trials, and we found true satisfaction in each other's company.